Use the mic. This house believes that child online safety campaigns should focus more on empowering than controlling what they do online. My speech begins in 3, 2, 1, go. Chair, this debate exists in a world where society wants to achieve ethical online behavior of children, but notice that in such a society, we have had things like sensitization campaigns for these particular kids to necessarily get the knowledge of how to use the internet safely. Notice that we are having sensitization campaigns whose main aim is to ensure that kids are able to use internet safely, they are able to avoid scams, they are able to avoid searching things like pornography on the internet. What do they focus on? Notice that the current safety campaigns necessarily focus on limiting what the children view online. Notice what this then looks like. It looks like you telling a kid that you're not supposed to use TikTok. TikTok is bad. You should only use Google and only search for things like that are related to studies. Why that then becomes inherently bad is that you're then limiting this kid's like sort of mind to only one particular thing. Why that then becomes even more worse is that this particular kid at one point will not be out of your control. That is to say that they'll then like be succumb to things like using online other platforms for things like online marketing or online trading. But apparently by this kid has grown up knowing that these sort of social platforms are platforms that are necessarily bad, platforms that are necessarily for scams and things of a sort. We necessarily see that then this person has limited experience on how to use these particular apps. What then happens is that we continuously have increasing cases of fraud necessarily happening in society. What then do we tell you? That we believe this particular safety campaign programs to then focus more on empowering these particular kids. Notice, empowering necessarily means that intensifying dialogue with these particular kids on the safe ways of interacting with the internet. That necessarily looks like providing a variety of like various internet apps that these particular kids might need to engage with in their day-to-day activities, but rather telling them how to like deal with each and every one, minimizing the risk that minimizing the risk that comes along with this sort of app that is like used online. What that then shows you is that we are providing wider knowledge of these particular kids to necessarily know about everything that is happening online. But secondly, we necessarily ensure that they make informed decisions if at all they are to use online at the end of the day. Notice that then these particular kids, they necessarily get to know that if at all I tap a particular link, I'm most likely going to be scammed, I'm most likely going to be frauded, I'm going to lose my money. How that then becomes effective in the long run is that we necessarily see this particular rejected, we necessarily see these particular individuals being informed about how to use the internet effectively. Share notice, then for any team to win this debate, they have to show us how they then achieve exclusivity in whatsoever aim that this particular safety campaigns necessarily run for. Notice, they also have to show us how then we necessarily get to ensure ethical behavior of such online campaigns, focusing on whatever they would want to focus on. Notice, on our side of the house, we tell you that we are able to achieve the main aim of this particular safety campaigns in a way that we necessarily provide information to these particular young kids so that they make informed like decisions. Notice, I beg to rest.
This house believes that child online safety campaigns should focus more on empowering them rather than what they do online. So, Chair, what you have to understand in this debate is, first of all, what the safety campaigns are targeting. They're targeting the children, right? Team Affirmative completely neglects the people you're kind of trying to protect in this debate. They are the children. There's a reason why in status quo children don't have the right of consent. The reason why they don't make their own decisions. They have the decisions guided by their parents, guided by the government. Right? That's why you have such things happening in status quo. Children, when they're developing, they are at a critical stage of developing. Scientifically, that means their minds are growing, and what they are exposed to greatly determines like kind of how the child is going to be brought up in society. And then the same thing, they tell us that you want a world where people are ethically built up, you find that won't be achieved because these children are at a critical stage, and that means that they can easily be manipulated. What they perceive as right can easily be changed very fast. So even though you tell us you expose them to this online matter, and then when they use it, they actually get to know more about the campaigns and all that, then they're able to solve it. You find you don't actually do that because these children are at a stage whereby they can easily be manipulated. Their brains are developing. What they are exposed to greatly determines who they become. For example, you start making a child who is supposed to be reading their books, who is supposed to be interacting with, let's say, other things. You start making them do more things like forex trading, or let them get engaged in hacking sites, because you tell them that actually hacking sites are actually bad, they'll hack you from there. You find what you actually end up creating on affirmative side of the house, you put children in such places where they can easily be manipulated and they can be framed, and the problems you're trying to avoid exist on their side of the house. So Chair, on our side of the house, we should actually believe that you should focus on telling them what they should do online rather than actually empowering them. Empowering could work for other generations, but not for children, because children are very critical. You find that when you focus on telling them what to do online, you have things like, you know, that children have to do, they have like research books and things. You tell them you can go ahead and search for your book, research your books, things online, but then you tell the children, don't go and watch pornography, don't go to the porn site. You tell the children, don't go and start indulging in betting. You tell them, don't go ahead and start doing forex trading, or you tell them not to actually accept to send people their PIN numbers anyhow, because once they actually do that, you find they end up being actually abused, or they end up being harassed in the end of the day. So focusing on what you tell them to do online is better, because you kind of then directly put a way of solving the problem in the status quo, in that you directly hint on the problem. Realize when children are growing up at home, they're brought up by their parents. Their parents continuously tell them, don't open the doors for strangers, and because of this, they're usually shaped by such decisions, right? That means that on our side of the house, we tell them not to do, and we show them the inherent harm. If they do that, what will happen to them? It's actually going to be bad. And then you find you create that shift in the children's mind, not to actually engage in that. They perceive that as bad until they have reached their age of consent, where they feel they can actually be able to go and indulge in this. That's when they can actually go and do this at the end of the day. So one thing that is kind of exclusive on our side of the house, how we solve the problem of safety, or we achieve ethical safety of children online, is that we actually then provide a direct solution, a solution that shows the children what you should not do, other than leaving the children to go and discover it for themselves. And once they discover it for themselves, others may end up being actually affected badly, and once they're affected badly, you have things like homicide coming up, children committing suicide because they've been exposed to such issues. I beg to submit.
I'm talking about. Okay, this house believes that child online safety campaigns should focus more on empowering them than controlling what they do online. Okay, so I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. We go. So panel, notice what side opposition front and why they think they win this debate, because they tell us the nature of the children. They tell us that, you know what, by them controlling what these children do, they're looking like they're preventing them from any sorts of manipulation, and they're preventing them from maybe decision making. But panel, what does team proposition tell you? Team proposition tells you that, you know what, when we enable these children, like deal with these safety campaigns, and by empowering them, one, when you empower someone, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not monitoring what they do. If you allow them go and use online safety campaigns, doesn't necessarily mean that you are not monitoring them. But even in a case where by that does happen, okay, if we were to assume their world where they have decision making not influenced by this, we're looking at their side of the world, seeming like a world where they are controlling everything that this child is doing online. This means that they're influencing their decision making, and therefore the children do not have the chance to make decisions in this case. Even when it says that, you know what, these are children that are very low, they do not have to make their own decisions, they have to just be driven from their case of the world. We look at what happens after these children are being being like they're no longer children. This is then happens like they've been growing up me thinking that they have to be decided for, they have to depend on other people to make their decisions, and therefore they do not stand on their own to make decisions. That then doesn't stand on their side. So Pando, what then a proposition tells you is like by empowering these children, you're able to like sensitize them and maybe groom them by giving them exposure. With giving them exposure, they can make informed decisions because they are informed about what they can do, they're informed about specific things, they can then do that. But then they limit the exposure by controlling them, and that then affects the decision making that if they are focusing for on the side. Then secondly, on manipulation. When they tell you that, you know what, these children are easily manipulated, we ask them a question. If rest, I'll come to you later. We ask them a question. If these children are easily manipulated online, you're controlling whatever they do online, does that prevent them from the manipulation? Even you tell that child that, okay, you know what, do not choose TikTok, do not choose Instagram, specifically use WhatsApp. They can easily be manipulated from WhatsApp. But what rather proposition tells you? Proposition is like when we go for these campaigns that empower these children, it means like these children are now empowered to make sure they can easily go away with the manipulation. Even when you tell me that do this, because I have the other incentive, I've already been groomed to be empowered, and I know, okay, I can make this, I can do this. Even you tell me that, you know what, do this, I'll go on and divert from that. Then Pano, and we run down to the main basics in this debate. This debate mainly looked at what the stakeholder better benefits. We look at the well-being of the stakeholder, specifically in the behavior of the child. Okay, what then team propositions first in this case? Team propositions first on effects of effectiveness and sustainability. On effectiveness, we tell you that one, we're having the exposure of these children to information. And what then happens when there is exposure? It happens like cases of these children being able to make their decisions and being able to get like this information exposed to things like that. But then we question a question on curiosity. We look at these children are the nature of these children are people that are being curious. Even when you put control them on specific aspects, they have this initiative of being curious and finding out what specifically you are limiting them. That then tells you that they will go and look for means to find this information. When they find this information, or when they do that, what you are preventing them from, it then puts them for risk of other certain things, and then a big choice my case.
Result. This house believes that child online safety campaigns should focus more on empowering them than controlling what they do online. Now, in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, as team negative, let me start with the rebuttals. They come on board and say that we are basically fronting for controlling of the children in this kind of debate. However, we are saying that we are providing guidance because at this critical stage, these children are exposed to mental exposure and actually they have issues with mental exposure and all that. And definitely, without guidance, this is going to seek them, and actually, this is going to affect their well-being, and at the end of the day, the empowerment that they do front for basically brings them more of disadvantages. It brings them affairs like betting. It brings them affairs like actually they can't control like what they do at the end of the day. It brings them manipulation and all that. They come and talk about the focus on they come and talk about them focusing on empowerment, and actually they bring out scenarios like it will enable them overcome the manipulation. That actually means they do accept to our concept that there is manipulation for these children. Now, in case there is manipulation, there is need to provide them with guidance as well as to control this. And the guidance is what we are fronting for, not what they are fronting for in that side of the house. They come and raise affairs like the affairs concerning the critical stage and all that. However, with guidance, we basically come on board and actually do front for this, ladies and gentlemen. We come and talk about affairs like guarantee for safety from our side of the house, whereby we look at affairs like cyberbullying and online fraud that exists in current status quo. We can take an example of a Kenyan case study whereby a Kenyan student was actually bullied by his friends online, and this student decided to carry out suicide. Now, without us coming out to provide guidance, we do not actually come out to solve this, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Weston.
Am I audible? Yeah, thank you. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think team opposition does not understand what they have to debate in this motion. I think them tying their kind of analysis on the idea that guidance is something very key is entirely very bad. Why? I think in this motion, we're not arguing in the assertion that parents do not exist in status quo. I think when you empower a kid, most probably they still have their parent to necessarily show them what they have to do. We have examples that people like Celine and things like Baby Passion that have necessarily been exposed to this kind of various social media handles, and they're able to use them coherently. Why? Most probably they had the influence of their parents who are necessarily there to back them. I think it is wrong for them to entitle their case on the idea that parents don't exist. But then secondly, I think it's also them to very wrong for them to think that, oh my God, manipulation is born outside our house and things like can't control the internet. I think when you empower someone, we're actually looking into the outer man. The entire reason as to why I have things like safety, like whatever we're arguing for in this motion, you see that children are able to use social media or these online platforms in the future very much coherently. I think on that kind of matter, the case then suddenly becomes wrong. Why? That case suddenly looks at the current kind of impact the kid is going to save. What then our side becomes better is that we're having long-term impacts. This kid is able to necessarily use this kind of internet very kind of usefully in the aftermath. Like when this kid is 18, they're most likely able to manipulate and use this kind of media very much important. What then this side of house then urges for, and why it becomes wrong, is that they're urging for that, oh my God, because you're protecting a kid currently, most probably they will be successful in the aftermath. I think what it becomes wrong is that when you tell someone what to do right now, most probably they're actually they idolize with that, and we tell you kids are necessarily that are necessarily curious about what the world necessarily holds for them. Necessarily looks like when they're 18 and they have to take decisions for themselves, they cannot do that. Why? You didn't expose them to the world, that what the world necessarily looks like or what the world necessarily wants. Our side of house why it becomes important is then we expose these kind of kids to various kind of sources, to various kind of ideologies, and they learn how to use them in the future. In the future, we're able to have kids that are necessarily independent, but then kids that are necessarily able to manipulate these kind of particular actions and able to sustain themselves in the long run. But then secondly, I think compare our world where kids are necessarily controlled and told what not to do and what to do, and then measure our world where necessarily kids are necessarily exposed to various kind of ideologies. I think why that really becomes important is that these kids can are able to necessarily know how best they can use this kind of internet. People like Celine have been able to gain this kind of relevance in society because they have got to know how best they can use the internet, and they're able to sustain themselves. A person like Celine in the future is going to be able to necessarily be successful. Why? Because she has learned how to use the internet from day one. What happens inside the house that kids are necessarily limited to what to do or what not to do online. What entirely becomes bad is that the kids are not able to think for themselves in the future. The entire reason why we have this kind of measures or whatsoever is to make sure that these kids are able to be sort of important or necessarily benefit society in the future. Not to only have kids that are necessarily able to think currently, but to have people that are necessarily able to think in the future. And that I think we win, and they will lose and even never win.
Okay, now what team proposition fails to understand in this kind of debate, right, is what the motion clearly states. This motion does not state for us to control what the children see, right? It just says what they do online, not necessarily control what they do online, right? Now, even though you come and say that it actually states that, let's take you on your best case that you say it states that, right? Understand that in our kind of world, right, we front for that guidance that then helps you to understand what happens when you're going to do something, right? In our kind of impact, right, we show you that on our side of the house, there's guidance. That guidance is in line with showing you what then happens if you actually go into something wrong. For example, if I go ahead to tap on a fraud site, for example, what's going to happen is that I'm going to be taking my money out of, right? To that extent, it then shows you, now what you do on your side is actually currently bad. Why? Because you directly expose these people to the harms. You currently fail to understand who the children are in this case. A child of 12 years is not able to understand and comprehend and clearly know what should I do and what should I not do. These people are at a critical stage of development, meaning anything that you expose them to is directly going to impact on their lives, whether positively or negatively. You showing them something like that is directly going to influence them to actually do something like that. What happens when you do that sort of thing is that you're going to be able to like have things like mental health disorders and all those sorts of things happening at the end of the day. Why? Because you have exposed them to the harms that are going to bring to them that level of disgrace and torture, right? Now, what happens on our side of the house, right, is that when you provide them with this control and necessary guidance, right, you help them to understand what is right and what should I or not do, right? You control what they are going to see and you help them to understand what is right. To that extent, you're able to now show them that this is what is right and this is what is also supposed to do. To that extent, you're able to attain the values that we actually need to attain at the end of the day. You're protecting their mental health sanity. You're enabling them to be empowered. To be strengthened in whatever they need to do at the end of the day. Because your kind of house at the end of the day does not in any way solve the problem of helping the students to actually achieve better education or better information access, right? At the end of the day, your information that you're providing to them is not censored. You're not providing them with the necessary know-how on what to do when they are actually getting this information. We do that very well. We are not saying that we are taking away the information access to them. No, we are actually helping them to understand what to do when they get this information and how best to do about this, right? To that extent, on the impact analysis, we show you that we best achieve the impacts that are positive on our side. That is mental health, strengthening the mental health points of view from these children and helping them to understand what is required of them when they are making the necessary research and the information search. On your side of the house, you're going to have children looking like people who are going to engage in different kinds of things because they believe, oh, I am informed, oh, I'm able to do whatever I want to do at the end of the day. Why is that necessarily wrong? Because they are not able to think at that level. They are still undergoing that level of development, meaning whatever you're going to expose them to is going to be inherently bad and will not enable them to grow the level of growth that they actually need to grow. We are going to have citizens who are going to be exposed to things like pornography, who are going to be exposed to things like fraud and other things that are negative to them. That is not what we want for our children. That is not what we want for Uganda. I beg to rest my case. Thank you very much.